friends, Rebecca here, the Dragon Librarian from Farmington Community Library, and Brill and I are here today to talk to you about our very last official video of the best books that I read in 2023. Now, I saved this video for the very last one because it's my particular favorite, because it's talking about my favorite genres, which are fantasy and science fiction. I love fantasy and science fiction. I think probably out of everything I read throughout the year, they would be the genres that I read the most of. So basically just because they're my favorite and I can never get enough of them. So I've read so many of those books, it was really hard to narrow it down. And I know I say that about all the genres I've talked about up until now, and it's true. It's really hard to narrow down when you've read so many fantastic books. But in particular, it was so hard to narrow these down, and I was trying to get it down to 5, and I could only manage to do 7 because it was just impossible. So one of the rules I imposed upon myself when making this list was that I could not have more than one author, and one author cannot have more than one work on this list, which seems like a weird rule. Like, why would you have multiple books by the same author on the same list? But it actually came into play a couple of times because there are 2 authors that I'm going to talk about today that I read multiple books of theirs this year, and they deserve to be on this list. But we'll talk about that. So I made sure to just cut that out and just pick the one I really absolutely love the most, which was still really hard to do. So these are the top 7 fantasy and science fiction books that I read last year in 2023. So we're going to go through them pretty quickly because there's a lot to talk about. Number 7 is Witch King by Martha Wells. Now, Martha Wells is really well known for her science fiction series Murderbot, which I'm actually currently reading right now. And she has written fantasy things before in the past, but this was the first one that she's written in a while. And so people were very excited when this came out. And this book gets a lot of mixed reviews, I think, because sometimes it can be very hard to follow. I didn't find it to be the case, but I could see how some people would. It is very intricately told. There is a point of view change often where we've got the main character and we're talking about what's happening now in the present, but then you get a lot of flashbacks about stuff that happened throughout his life. So what is this book about, and why did it put itself on my list of favorites for last year? So this book is about a demon named Kai who was murdered, and in the beginning of the book he finds that his body has been imprisoned in this weird water cell, right, in this tower dungeon, and some magician is trying to bring him back to try to use and steal his powers. So of course Kai completely overpowers him. He puts himself in a different body. He wakes up his other friend that has been imprisoned with him, and he's trying to now figure out, why was he imprisoned, who imprisoned him, what is going on in the world since he has been in this dungeon. So you've got him and his companion traveling throughout this fantasy realm, trying to find out what happened. But then you also have, because he's a demon and he's been around for a really long time, you also have these flashback scenes that are talking about his life from the beginning to where we are now. And it sounds like a lot, right? It is intricately plotted. The thing is with this book is the author doesn't do any of the work for you. She lays it all out, and it is up to you to piece things together, to make connections where they are and figure out what is going on. I absolutely loved it. This is really not a great book if you are distracted or if you have a lot on your mind and you can't really devote a lot of your reading attention to it, because it's not a fluff book. It's not a fluff fantasy book. This is you really have to pay attention to everything that's going on. And I love stories like that, right? Believe me, I love fluff stories too. We're going to talk about one of them a little bit later on. But this is just, it's so well written. Martha Wells is a phenomenal writer. She's one of the best in the genre. So even if it might sound a little daunting or overwhelming to you, I highly recommend you give this a shot because it's fantastic. Witch King. Okay. Coming in at number 6, Masters of Death by Olivie Blake. Now, this is the first of the authors on this list that I had to cut multiple books that I had that I read of hers this year because they were just all so fantastic and I wanted them to all be on this list. But I narrowed it down to just one, and this was the one I picked. Now, you may remember this author if you've watched my other best of videos because she also had a book in my runners up series. And the thing with Olivie Blake is a lot of her work was independently published, and it wasn't up until she had one series called the Atlas 6 that came out that was so popular it was picked up by a really big publishing company. And since that came out and was printed by this big publishing company, they are now redoing all of her older works. So the world is getting a lot of her books that were previously not easy to find in beautiful new format. So there's a lot of her books that came out this year, and I devoured them all. She is becoming one of my go-to favorite authors. Every time she writes something now, I'm just really invested in it. And she's also one of those authors that is really talented in the fact that she can write a different, completely new story every time. Sometimes when you read a lot of the same work by an author, you recognize similar themes, or you feel like, oh, I can tell this author a mile away. I know who I'm reading when I read it, right? But all of her stories are just so different and unique and refreshing that they're just absolutely amazing. So this little gem of a book is about a slew of different characters, and I'm just going to give you a couple of them because you've got Fox, who is this medium, right? He's this like psychic character, and he is the adopted son of death itself. You've got this other character named Violet, who is she sells houses. She's a real estate agent, but she's also a vampire. And you've got, in the beginning of the story, she's trying to sell this house, and there is a ghost in the house who will not leave until she helps him figure out who murdered him. So she goes to enlist the help of Fox to try to figure out what happened with this ghost and why was he murdered, and shenanigans ensue from there. There's also a lot in this book to deal with this ancient high stakes game that different characters play. It's incredible. This book is just, it's fun, it's funny, it's really deep and introspective, and the writing is just absolutely gorgeous. I love everything that this woman writes. It's just so good. And this was probably my favorite of the fantasy stuff I read of hers this year. Masters of Death. So good. All right, we're on number 5 now. Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe by Emma Torzs. Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe. This is my special edition copy of the book, which has really beautiful page edges and a cool background and things like that. And it's just absolutely lovely. But this book is one of those books that is intended to hook people like me because it is a book about books. You know that anytime there's going to be a book about books or libraries or bookstores, I am all over that, right? So this is about magical books, and it is about a family whose job is to guard these books and preserve these books. Because in this world, these magical books have the ability to grant people different powers. You can, if you read one of these magical books, you can walk through walls, or you can fly, or you can do all this other host of different stuff. So it is the job of this one family to protect these books from, people that would abuse them, basically. So you've got 2 sisters in the story. One who is on the run for her life because her mother met a untimely death and she is trying to stay ahead of the people who are after her. The other sister is holed up at the family home with lots of magical wards around the house and everything like that, and she is the one that really is just protecting these books. So their father, when their father dies, this basically the steward of this, he dies, and the sister that is home with these books, Joanna, she discovers that there was a book in this collection that she didn't know about, that her father had kept hidden. And so it's up to her, and she has to try to contact the other sister to try to figure out what is going on with this book, why their father died, and they uncover this bigger world than they ever knew was involved with these books. What I really loved about this book is that it's so beautifully written. So it is a little bit of a slower paced story because there's a lot of world building here and a lot of talking about these different books, but it's just so well done. And it's not over the top fantasy, so that if you're the kind of person who isn't really a big fantasy reader, but you're just looking to try something in the genre, this is a great one to start with because it is not over the top with fantasy things to try to remember. It's a very low key, slower paced story that takes place in the real world with just some magical elements, right? So it's a really great book, I think, for people who are, I mean, obviously, if you love fantasy, you're going to love this book because I did. But if you're also a person who hasn't read a lot of fantasy and you're looking for something that's maybe not too overwhelming, this is a good pick. Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe. Okay, we're at number 4. I love this book. I gifted this book a couple times to people for the holidays. It's absolutely fantastic. Starter Villain by John Scalzi. Starter Villain. Now, I am a huge, huge John Scalzi fan. The reason for that is because I'm always recommending his books because I think that they are such fantastic books for people who aren't really, really big science fiction or fantasy fans. So sometimes science fiction in particular can be a little bit overwhelming in the fact that there's a lot of terms, there's a lots of science aspects to it, that if you don't really understand them, you can be lost. Sometimes the jargon is really incredibly hard to understand. But John Scalzi is, I think, one of the best authors out there right now who is writing relatable, easy to read science fiction and fantasy stuff. And look at how short this book is. It's a very short slice of a story. It's absolutely fantastic. And even if you, again, like I was talking about with the other book, I love fantasy and science fiction. So it's not like these are books that if you're a huge fan of these genres, you're going to be like, it's too babyish or whatever for me. No, not at all. They're fantastic. I love these books so much. This one too. It's just that they're also really good to recommend to people. And like I said, I got this book as a gift for a few people for the holidays because it's just perfect. So this is about a down and out, this main character is he's divorced, he's got this teaching job that he's not really crazy about, he lives alone with his cat. His life is kind of depressing. And in his mind, I mean, I think living alone with your cat sounds pretty cool, but he says that he's just kind of depressed. He doesn't really know how he wants to make his dreams come true, which his biggest dream really is that he wants to open up his own pub. So when he has this uncle, this estranged uncle that wasn't very close with, dies, and he leaves him everything, what he actually leaves him is his supervillain enterprise, because apparently his uncle, unbeknownst to him, was a supervillain. So now he's got this volcano secret lair, he's got all these underlings, he's got this big conglomerate of villain stuff that he has to deal with. And on top of that, his uncle had a lot of enemies who are now after our main character. So if you've read John Scalzi before, you know there is just a thread of humor that runs through his stories, which is very present here. This book is hilarious. I laughed out loud so much. There's a cat in a business suit on the cover because there are lots of cats in this book that can talk, that are villain henchmen. It is just the funniest thing I've ever read. And again, it's a very short book. If you're looking for something fun and funny and just a really great story, Starter Villain. It's amazing. I kind of want to read it again now after I'm talking about it. All right, so we're down to the last 3. Book number 3 is one I'm sure you've heard of, even if you haven't read it. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Now, I was so excited about this book a year before it came out when I first saw the cover of it and the description of it on a publisher's weekly journal at the library. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's about dragons. It's about a school for riding dragons. Of course I want to read this. And then it came out last May and totally blew up. It took the book world by storm. I don't think people really, this author was not a known author before this. And I think it surprised everybody how well it did. So this is part of a series. this is the first book. The second book, Iron Flame, is also out now. It came out in November, which is another amazing thing for the first 2 books in a series to come out in the same year. That's pretty awesome. So there was a little bit of a controversy recently with this author in regard to some of the words that she used that she mispronounced. I'm not here to talk about any of that. I'm just here to talk about the book itself and what I liked about it. So yes, I got the first edition that has the pretty dragons on the cover. So this is technically, it is a fantasy story, but it's technically also part of the subgenre romancy. So it's a fantasy romance. So there's a lot of romance elements to the story set in a fantasy world. So the main character is Violet, and she is training to be a elite, fighter in this school that she's going to, this dragon riding school, and it's harrowing. People are trying to kill her because her mother is a general. There are, dragons that are really dangerous, and she also has a physical disability with her joints that makes it a little bit harder for her than others to keep up physically. So she has to kind of overcome all of the odds to succeed here. Now, what I loved about this book is I loved the dragons, obviously. Obviously, I love books that have to do with dragons, right? I did also love the romance aspect of it. And I really liked the storytelling. It was a very engaging story. It hooked me. The beginning scenes, the opening scenes of this book are so engaging. I could not put it down. I could not put it down when I first started reading it. And I absolutely loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. If you like dragons, if you like fantasy stories, if you like fantasy romance stories, give Fourth Wing a try, because I think you will like it. There's a lot of hype about this book, and I am definitely one of the people that thinks it is true. I think it is a phenomenal book. Highly recommend Fourth Wing. All right, now, books 2 and book 1, I had a really hard time deciding which one was going to be which. It was very, very difficult for me because I love them both so much, and deciding which one was going to be the first one was just really tough. But I forced myself to make the decision, and book number 2 is Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Now, this is another author that appeared on this list that I had to cut out multiple books that they wrote this year that came out, because Brandon Sanderson is, first of all, he's one of my favorite contemporary authors. He is very prolific. So he wrote 4 books. So he has multiple series going on right now. So he's got adult fantasy books, he's got teen science fiction story, he's got young middle grade books that he writes. He is writing so much all the time, and they're all good. So it's not just crap he's pumping out. It's all fantastic. Well, during the pandemic, he wrote 4 standalone books. 4. In a year of the pandemic, he wrote 4 brand new books in addition to all the other things he's working on. So in 2023, the books all came out a couple months after each other, and multiple of those books were just, I loved them. Loved them. This one I had to pick as my favorite of the ones he released. This book reads very much like The Princess Bride. If you're a fan of that movie, it's sort of like that whimsical, beautiful story, and I got that same sort of whimsy from this book as well. Oh my gosh, this story. So it's about a girl named Tress who lives in this world where she's on this island, but the water that surrounds it isn't real water like we know it to be. It's like spores that fly in the air. It's really hard to explain. You have to read it to understand it. And she collects teacups. And she's currently in the process of falling in love with the mayor's son. So they have this beautiful little relationship. Well, when he is basically kidnapped by this nefarious pirate queen, right, out in the sea, she thinks all hope is lost. She's never going to see him again. But then she realizes that there is stuff she can do about it, and she decides to go and try to rescue him. So this is a story about true love. It's a story about pirates. It's a story about a girl finding herself and being strong for the people she loves. It's about talking animals, because there is a rat that she befriends that can talk because he's under her spell. Oh man, and if you've never read anything by Brandon Sanderson before, I just can't convey to you how fantastic of a writer he is, because his work is just so, even though it's about all these amazing, crazy things, it's also so relatable. There's always something about his characters that you can relate to and love, and they're just all so well written. Highly recommend, if you haven't read anything by Brandon Sanderson, maybe check this one out, because this is a standalone book. It's a beautiful, fun story. It will give you a great idea of the kind of writer he is. Tress of the Emerald Sea. Okay, we're down to it. My favorite fantasy or sci-fi book that I read in 2023. It had to be this one. A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. Now, please don't be overwhelmed. Yes, this book is almost 900 pages long. This book is the prequel to Priory of the Orange Tree, which came out in 2019. But you don't have to have read Priory of the Orange Tree to read and enjoy this one. There are some things in it that are revealed that you do find out in Priory that might be a little bit of a spoiler, but if you don't care about that, I would say totally you can read this first. This takes place like thousands of years before the Priory book. So this book essentially is about two different realms. You've got the Eastern realm and the Western realm. And in the Eastern realm, dragons are revered and worshipped. They're like sort of the Eastern dragons we think of today. They are heavenly benefactors. They help with the weather and things like that. Elite people are trained to ride them. And then you have the West, where the dragons are basically monsters and destructive forces. And they're the ones that you can think of that have like the wings and the fire and things like that. And it's about basically this one terrible dragon that is wreaking havoc that the people have to come together to try and defeat. Now, that sounds like a very simplistic story for something that's almost 900 pages long, because this is also very character driven too. You've got these host of different characters in both realms, the East and the West, and you're following on their journeys with them. I just adore this book. Priory of the Orange Tree is one of my top 5 favorite books ever of all time. So when I learned this was coming out, I was so very excited. I mean, and look at the cover art. My God, that's just gorgeous, right? So you've got a beautiful Eastern dragon here with the mane and the serpentine body. And then on the back, you've got, the Western dragon with the fire and everything like that. I don't want to say too much more about this because I don't want to give anything else away, but it's so beautifully written. It's a phenomenal book. It's so great. Please, please, please give this book a chance. Even if it's really long, I know it's super long, but it's so worth the read. If you are a big fantasy fan already, you're going to love it. If you are new to the genre, I still think you're going to love it. Characters are relatable and wonderful and amazing. And one thing I forgot to mention about this book that Samantha Shannon is pretty much known for in her work is that there are a lot of female characters in this book and in Priory of the Orange Tree that are so strong and empowering. She excels at writing women, and she excels at writing empowering and powerful women, and there are so many in this book. Highly recommended. I can't talk enough about this book, A Day of Fallen Night. Well, that's it, guys. That's what we've got for you today. My favorite fantasy and sci-fi books of 2023. I hope some of them sound really interesting and awesome and might be something you want to try. If so, you can definitely find them all at Farmington Community Library. And also, thank you so much for watching, friends, and taking this journey with us. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day.